Hello and welcome. My name's George, and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today, we're going to be looking at the M4 Mac Mini. I got one of these a few months ago, so I want to share with you how I've been liking it, some things that I don't like so much, and we're going to dive basically into everything. I'll explain why I decided to get this particular Mac, as well as the specs I got. We'll look at some storage considerations and as well as some real world audio production tests to see how it stacks up against my previous Mac. So let's dive. Okay, so let's start with why I bought this computer at all. So my previous kind of music production workstation computer was an iMac, Intel based. It was loaded with 64 gigs of RAM, lots of hard drive space. And to be honest, it still works great and performs exactly how I need it to. It's got plenty of power. I get the odd bogged down, but for most of the things that I do, it works great. And I didn't really feel the need to have any more computer power. Now, the one thing with it is it has an Intel chip. And with working with Logic, there's been more and more features that are only supported with the new silicon chips, such as a stem splitter, for example. The Chroma Glow plugin is another one that's not supported on Intel-based Macs. And then with the mastering assistant as well, you don't get all the different models. So there more and more, there's things that I just wasn't able to get on my Intel-based Mac. And I only saw that problem kind of getting worse. So since I was doing this upgrade really purely to get one of the M chips, I didn't really want to spend a ton of money since I already have a computer that I felt could do most of my needs. So I started looking at the options, and more when I was looking online, I saw people talking about, how great this M4 Mac Mini was and how cheap the base model was. So after looking at the other options available, I decided to give the Mac Mini a shot. So let's take a look at the exact specs that I got, and I'll tell you my reasoning behind those as well. So here's the current lineup of Mac Minis. So I decided to start with the base model. So let's go ahead and select that. And you can see if you just stick with the base model, then you're looking at $599, which is very reasonable. Now for the memory, I did decide to upgrade to 24 gigabytes. And the main reason behind that is for creating these videos. When I'm doing these demonstrations, I'm running Logic Pro. I'm also running my screen recording software. So I have a lot of other applications going on in the background in addition to just running Logic Pro. So for that reason, I decided to upgrade the memory. And the memory is just going to allow you to run kind of more programs at once, or if you're doing a lot of orchestral software instrument things, for example. However, if I wasn't doing the video stuff on top of just music production, I'd feel totally comfortable going with the 16 gigabytes of RAM. In my previous computer, I mentioned I had 64 gigabytes of RAM. And with these new M chips, the RAM's actually a lot more efficient. So you can get away with less RAM than you could in the previous Intel chips. So that upgrade adds a $200 to the Mac Mini right there. Now for storage, this is kind of a big topic, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this later. But I stuck with 256 gigabytes of storage space. Now, the reason I did this is because I knew that the base M4 Mac Mini, you can actually upgrade yourself. There's a kit available. I created a whole separate video on how to do this install. So if you're interested in that, please check that out. I'll just give a disclaimer. This isn't really for the faint of heart. If you're not into tinkering with electronics, then I probably suggest that you don't do this. But if you are someone who likes doing that sort of thing, then this is something you might want to look at. Just quickly, this is where I got that hard drive from. So I got a 2 terabyte hard drive for $320. If we go back here, if I were to upgrade to 2 terabytes through Apple, that's an extra $800. So that brings the price up significantly there. Now, if you don't feel comfortable opening up your brand new Mac, I would suggest getting at least 512 gigabytes of storage. With the 256, if you're running Logic and you download all the sounds are around 70 gigabytes. Once you have the system installed and a few other pieces of software, your hard drive is basically full. So the only way to make it work with 256 is, to have an external drive and constantly offloading things to the external drive. So I would suggest getting a minimum of the 512 gigabytes of storage space. The Ethernet for most people, and myself included, gigabyte Ethernet's totally fine. I would only upgrade to the 10 gigabit Ethernet if, let's say, you were sharing some hard drives over a network or something like that, and you needed a really fast local network speed. But other than that, you can stick with the regular gigabit Ethernet. And pre-installed software, if you don't already have Logic, then you can add that there, but you can always buy that from the App Store. And if you've previously bought Logic, you don't need to buy it again for a second computer. You just log in to the Apple Store using your Apple ID, and your purchase will already be there, and you could just reinstall Logic. So for most people, as I mentioned, I would probably go back down to 16, but keep the 512. So you're looking at $799 for a great machine. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about storage. So as I mentioned, with all the Logic sounds, you're going to fill up a smaller hard drive pretty quick. So I recommend at least 512. And as I mentioned, I went up to 2 terabytes. However, for me, even 2 terabytes, I've already basically filled that up with all my different software libraries. If you're someone who owns Native Instruments Complete, for example, if you have the collector's edition, then you're looking at 1.1 terabytes just for that software. So you're going to, as I mentioned, quickly fill up your internal drive. So regardless of the size of hard drive unless you get a 4 terabyte drive, you probably want to look at getting an external drive to manage some of your software libraries if you're going to own some third-party libraries, because those can get quite big, quite fast, especially the orchestral stuff. If, however, you're just using Logic's built-in sounds, well, then you can definitely get away with 512 or a 1 terabyte drive. Now, for myself, I'm still actually debating how I'm going to manage my own software libraries. Right now, I have them all on my internal drive. And as I mentioned, that's kind of filling up real quick, especially in addition to doing video. The video takes up a lot of space too. So my plan is, I'm going to keep my system drive for my system, Logic Pro, and any session files will live on the system drive. And then I want to offload all the software libraries to an external drive. So I'll just share the different options I'm looking at, and then perhaps in the future, I'll update you on the direction I went. So this is one option, the Acasis Mac Mini M4 Workstation, and it's kind of a little capsule that you slide your Mac Mini into. And this gives you some extra ports. So you can see we get some USB A slots, which we don't have on the Mac Mini. We also get some display ports. But the one thing we get is two M2 slots where we can add some external drives. So we can add up to 16 terabytes with external M2 drives. So you can have 8 on each. So if you were to max those out, that should give you plenty of room for anything you might need. And with this, the extra ports are certainly handy. As I mentioned, we don't get USB A ports on the Mac Mini, which, to be honest, most of my things are USB A at the moment. My MIDI keyboard is, my audio interface is, my typing keyboard. I don't have a lot of things that are USB C. So I had to get a little hub for that at the moment, but this would kind of clean up that setup a little bit. So another option I came across is by Satoshi, and this is kind of a similar thing, but instead of an enclosure, this just sits on top of this little hub. And here again, you get the 3 USB ports as well as SD port, and we get one SSD slot. So in this one, we could have up to 4 terabytes, which again should be plenty for most people. And the last option I'm considering is again by Satoshi, but this one is just purely an external drive. So there's no ports or anything like that, but it's made at the same dimensions as the Mac Mini. So it just looks nice and slick. And there's, of course, other external hard drive enclosures that you can get that don't look like the Mac Mini, but work exactly the same. But this is kind of cool that it just really looks nice and clean. Now, the one thing with this one is since it's purely a hard drive and it doesn't have all the other ports, then you're not sharing any bandwidth with those other ports because there's one single cable going from the Thunderbolt port to the external and nothing else. So you get faster drive speeds that way when compared to this, where there's still just one cable going from this hub to the Mac Mini, but now we're splitting that bandwidth over all these different ports and the external drive. So if you're looking for pure speed for an external drive, then I would suggest taking a look at this one. Okay, now let's talk about some of the issues that I've run into with this new Mac Mini. Most of them have been kind of software related. As I mentioned, I've been on an Intel based chip for a while, and some of the software hasn't really transferred over as smoothly as I would like. And that's a little bit to be expected, especially when you're changing operating systems. But I've definitely found that there's been a lot more software glitches than I've been used to with my previous computer. And hopefully that'll kind of get less and less as I sort through which software's kind of not playing so great with the new Mac Mini. Some of the plugins that haven't been working all that great are some of the isotope ones that I have. I use, for example, the RX 10, I believe it is, to kind of clean up my audio recordings when I'm doing these videos. And that won't open in Logic Pro unless I run it in Rosetta mode. So for example, you can run Logic Pro in what's called Rosetta mode. And what that does is disable any of the silicon specific plugins, and it lets you use some older plugins. So there's a bit of a compromise there. So at the moment, I'm kind of going back and forth. If I were to upgrade to the latest version of RX, then that would likely solve the problem. But the old version works just fine. So I'm a little hesitant to spend money on something I don't really need to. But I'm sure in the future, I'll likely upgrade just to avoid that hassle of having to switch back and forth all the time. My Motu interface, which is a USB interface, it's a few years old now. The 896 is what I'm running, and it's been working fine. But when I switch sample rates from 44 to 48, for example, it would previously just kind of switch automatically depending on my Logic project. And now that's not happening. So if the interface is set to something different than Logic, then it all gets hung up and kind of crashes, and it's not all that great. So again, that's just something about the older software and older drivers working with the hardware. So I'll likely kind of update my interface um, in the future here, but for now, it works. It works great when you have everything set correctly. But as I said, it used to just switch automatically, and which now it doesn't. So another little kind of quirk that I'm dealing with the new M4 chip. So if you're running some older hardware or some older plugins, just be aware that you might run into a few issues, but you should be able to go on the manufacturer websites and see what's still supported and what's not. Okay, so now let's compare performance a little bit. So let's start with my previous computer, which is a iMac 2019 Intel 3.6 gigahertz 8-core i9 with 64 gigabytes of RAM. And I have a Logic project opened up here. I'm currently have my buffer set to 128, which is usually where I'm working when I'm recording. When I'm mixing and I need more power, I'll usually bump this up. But for this test, let's just see where we land at 128. So the project I have open, this is kind of all audio tracks. I don't think there's any software instruments on this one. I'll do another comparison with one that's more software instrument heavy in a moment. I'll just play the chorus and let's see where we land. Only time that it feels that way because I'm wide awake. That's the way you like it when you're to the top. Don't have to be alone, working to the bone. Ain't got no more money, but damn, I'm feeling funny and it's a better way. Okay, so it's handling it just fine. We have one core peaking around 50%, and the rest we're kind of hovering around 25. Now, let's just see if we can make this crash, and let's bring the buffer size down. Let's go to 32 here. Only time that it feels that way because I'm wide awake. That's the way you like it when you're to the top. Don't have to be alone, working to the bone. Ain't got no more money, but damn, I'm feeling funny and it's a better way. Okay, so it performed fairly similarly. And no issues at all. So as you can see, this is why I was kind of hesitant to upgrade in the first place, is my iMac was performing just fine. But now let's go over to another project that's more software instrument heavy and see how that does. I'm going to stick with a buffer of 32 and let's see how the iMac does. So as you can see, we were able to get through the whole song without it stopping on us. However, that one core was getting pretty close to 100%. So I think if we had any more plugins or anything like that, it probably would have crashed. So now let's go see how the Mac Mini M4 stacks up. Okay, so I now have the same audio based project loaded up on the Mac Mini. I've gone straight to a buffer size of 32. So let's see how the Mac Mini does. Only time that it feels that way because I'm wide awake. That's the way you like it when you're to the top. Don't have to be alone, working to the bone. Ain't got no more money, but damn, I'm feeling funny and it's a better way. 3 days on the road. So it did just great. So the one core was kind of hovering over 25%, and the rest, I mean, gonna guess kind of in the 15% range. So we had a lot of room to go with using primarily just audio tracks. So now let's check out the more software instrument heavy track. Okay, so here's the project based primarily off of software instruments. Again, just going straight to 32 buffer size. And let's see how the M4 does. Okay, great. So as you saw, the one core was kind of hovering close to the 50% mark, and the rest were around 25% or under. So we basically have twice as much processing power as on the iMac. So we have plenty of more room to go. We could add a bunch more tracks, and I'm sure we would be just fine. So as you can see, for most people, this M4 Mac Mini is going to perform just great for most people's needs. So go with the base model, upgrade the storage, and you're set. There's no need to go and upgrade to the M4 Pro or looking at the Mac Studio, for example. If you've got money to burn and just want the best of the best, then by all means, but I don't think it's really necessary for most people's studio and music production needs. A couple other things I want to touch on. I mentioned briefly the ports. So we've got 2 USB-C ports on the front and 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the back. So a total of 5, as well as the HDMI and Ethernet, and then power. So if you're like me and you needed some more USB-A ports, then you're going to want to get a hub for that. Those other docks that I showed earlier, those can be a solution for that. Or for most things, if it's just like a typing keyboard and your mouse and things like that, you don't need an expensive dock for that. You can just kind of get cheap hubs that will convert things. But if you're plugging in things like external hard drives, then you probably want to put that on a dedicated port. And the Thunderbolt ports at the back here, those are going to be faster than the USB ones at the front, especially if you're using an SSD drive. The other thing I really like about this computer for studio is it's dead quiet. I never hear the fan at all. And so it's completely silent. So you can record in the same room with the computer and no issues there. I also have a 2020 MacBook Pro, and the fan on there, when I'm doing production work, it gets really loud, and it definitely would get picked up if you were to record near it. So, yeah, that's something I really like about this machine. It's also really portable. So, if you need to bring it somewhere at a friend's house and they already have kind of a monitor and keyboard set up for you, you can just throw this in your bag and plug a few things in and you're ready to go. So, again, if you're looking for a new computer, you're like me, maybe you're still on an Intel Mac and want to make the jump to the silicon chips, the Mac Mini is a great way to go, especially if you already have a monitor and a typing keyboard and mouse that you can use. It certainly keeps the costs down. If you have any questions about the Mac Mini or how I'm using it, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And if you want to improve your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Ultimate Logic Pro Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro hotkey cheat sheet, my audio recording guide, my mixing guide, my gear guide, and my Logic Pro session templates. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.